Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
Good afternoon. No, good morning, everyone. We are still in the morning hours. Welcome to the CSWR Monday Research Lunch and Lecture. It is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Shannon Taggart, to you. Shannon is joining us as a visiting scholar for the entire month of March. So if you are interested in Shannon's work, please reach out to her. She's living here at the center. We hope that our visiting scholars engage with the community, so please take advantage of the short time that we have with Shannon. I'm going to read out to you Shannon's brief biography, academic biography, and then I'm going to do a little show and tell for those of you who don't know her work as well as I do. So Shannon first learned spiritualism as a teenager after a medium revealed details about her grandfather's death that proved to be true. In 2001, she began photographing at Lilydale in New York, which is home to the world's largest spiritualist community. Her work expanded into a now 25-year investigation of séance practices and a quest to document ectoplasm, the elusive substance said to be both spiritual and material. Her book, her 2019 book, Séance, was named one of Time Magazine's best photographic books of the year, and has exhibited internationally and featured by CNN, the New York Times, Le Monde, the Washington Post, the Paris Review, among other places. I'm going to hand around my cherished copy of Séance, so please be mindful of your fingers as you page through it. I'd like it to be returned in the similar condition in which I hand it around. I'm also going to hand around a recent article that Shannon has published in, forgive me, is it Art Forum? It's in Art Forum. So has this come out yet?
Yes, it's out right now.
It's out just now. Okay, this you can feel free to grime up with your hands, because I can always print out another copy. This, please be careful of. So in all seriousness, no, Shannon, it's such a delight to have you here, a privilege. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Okay, thank you. I am so honored to be here. I'm thrilled. I just got in yesterday, and so it's exciting to kick off the residency with my talk about my book. Well, I'll start with my book, and then I'm going to get into the other work that I do, because I was not expecting to become a researcher and a writer. I started out just as a photographer. And so, yes, I have my book, Séance. This was the first edition, and then the second edition came out in 2022. And it has also traveled as an exhibition. It's currently in Indiana University at Bloomington. And from there, it's going to Cannes, France. And at one of my installs, I had the absolute pleasure of presenting with Dr. Ambrowdy, who is here today, and I'm so grateful that you are here. And we had a really fun talk in Albany together. So my book, Séance, it took almost 2 decades to complete, because spiritualism is a challenging topic. And back in 2001, when I started this work, I just planned to spend one summer making a short, straightforward documentary essay about Lilydale, New York, the town which is home to the world's largest spiritualist community. But to my surprise, I made a very shocking discovery that summer. I learned about spiritualism's cultural history, which was a story I had never heard before. Those facts were missing from every textbook I had ever read. This is a picture of the Italian medium Giuseppe Palladino, who is studied by many of the most famous scientists of her day, including several laureates. Stories like Giuseppe's have often been censored. There has been a queasiness concerning spiritualism in academia and in the media. But however uncomfortable, it is undeniable that spiritualism It stands at a crossroads of modern Western culture. Its influence echoes in and connects to the history of science, medicine, technology, politics, and art. Wherever you find 19th century innovation, you also find spiritualism. Now, before I expose and explore spiritualism's truly provocative visual record and share some of my own photographs of mediums in action, I want to quickly introduce spiritualism itself. Spiritualism was born in a haunted house on the eve of April Fools, March 31st, 1848. That night, the unlikely pioneers of the movement, two adolescent sisters, Kate and Margaret Fox, claimed contact with the spirit of a murdered man buried beneath their home. Their method of communicating using letter-coded rapping developed into a hugely popular movement that spread across the Western world. And so,
Just dispel that little...
Oh.
I don't know how we do that. It's just obscuring your...
Okay. Is it this thing?
I don't know. I don't want to waste time, but you see, it's in the way of your beautiful. I can't.
Oh, I got it. I see what you're saying.
Spending any time.
Oh.
Can't figure it out.
Escape? Should I escape? Is that it?
I think it would involve unsharing your screen and then.
Should I do it? Should I do it? Yeah.
I don't think it's worth it.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, so what I wanted to say about spiritualism is, even though, despite the term seance has a French name and spiritualism and seances have a storied association with Victorian England, the science is an American invention. It's an American-born religion. And it started in upstate New York, which is where I'm from, in an area called the Burned Over District, where a dozen of spiritual movements, utopian communities, and new religions burst forth, including Mormonism, Seventh-day Adventism, and Shakerism. There was over 30 movements. And growing up, I never heard about this history. It's not talked about that much in upstate New York, which is pretty strange. The scholar Jocelyn Godwin has noted the whole phenomena, with its concentration in time and space, is without parallel in social or religious history. And to this day, it's not really understood why all these spiritual awakenings happened in that tiny spot of land. So as American spiritualism developed into a new religious movement, it aimed to merge religion and science. And to this day, spiritualists describe it as a science, a philosophy, and a religion. Spiritualism gave a voice not only to the departed, but also to the disenfranchised. Reformers and radicals were drawn to the movement. Abolitionists, free love, and child rights advocates, vegetarians, holistic medicine practitioners were all part of its development. The women's rights movement was particularly linked at a time when it was dangerous for women to speak in public. Spiritualists put suffragettes such as Susan B. Anthony on stage. And I have to mention, again, Dr. Braudy's book, because it is such a phenomenal piece of scholarship, and it was so trailblazing and so important. And I thank you for that book. As spiritualism developed, scientists are proving that the invisible was indeed real, and there was all these unseen forces that surround us, and they do have agency in our lives. Radiation was discovered, germ theory of disease, the power of electricity was harnessed, invisible communication happened with the telegraph, the telephone, and the phonograph. Some of the esteemed scientists responsible for these discoveries also investigated spiritualism and attended seances, such as the Curies and Thomas Edison, who worked on a device to talk with the dead during the last 10 years of his life. One really interesting thing I learned through the scholarship of Kathy Gutierrez, who wrote a great book about spiritualism called Plato's Ghost, is that spiritualism helped birth forensic science. Cesare Lombroso formulated his forensic theory using the same instruments he brought to investigate seances. Pursuing a spirit's absent presence gave him the idea to focus on the criminal rather than the crime, and a new science was born. Photography was invented in 1839, and this new media soon revealed facts about the world that were invisible to the eye. And so photography really created this question between the relationship between seeing and knowing. And then you have developments like the X-ray, which exposed the body's hidden interior, and that further inspired faith in photography's power to picture the invisible. And so all of this kind of spurred this photographic interest in spiritualism. And one of the most important scientists of the 18th century, William Crookes, whose work paved the way for the X-ray and the invention of television, he spent 30 years investigating spiritualism, and he was also the first person to photograph a true or real full materialist spirit materialization. And he was the very first to do that. Creative figures were also inspired by spiritualism, including William Butler Yeats, who channeled his novel of vision through the mediumship of his wife. Carl Jung based his 1902 dissertation on seances he conducted with his cousin. The surrealists famously co-opted spirit techniques of automation and the use of the trance state. But now, or recently, now it's almost 15 years since, but slowly art historians acknowledge that spiritualism helped ignite the very birth of modern art. Spiritualist artists such as Georgiana Houghton and Hilma af Klint are now confirmed as pioneers of abstract painting, both predating Kandinsky. And in Houghton's case, her work predates Kandinsky by over 50 years. And so these painters, Hilma af Klint's retrospective at the Guggenheim in New York was the most popular exhibition of all time, the best-selling catalog in the museum's history. And we see this once marginalized history of painting. We see spiritualism being re-acknowledged, it's being theorized, it's being celebrated, it's actually reshaping the whole origin story of modern art. And so this was all really shocking to me, and I could not believe that I had never heard of any of this before. Things like, President Lincoln and his wife hosted seances in the White House. But my bigger surprise was finding that spiritualism and photography had been connected since their beginnings. This link between spiritualism and photography became a primary focus. And in my opinion, spiritualism's photographic past is one of the most bizarre, absurd, and uniquely unsettling chapters within the history of photography. And one of the most mind-blowing things for me was realizing it was the first religion to create an iconography using the new medium of photography. So you have new media taking, this place for sacred art. And you could say that spiritualism is to photography as Catholicism is to painting. And my own work became an attempt to build onto this strange record. But again, in 2001, when I started this work, there was very little known about this stuff. So I found I was constantly having to talk about the history when I showed my own work. And so when I started at Lilydale, these are some vintage pictures of Lilydale. And this is actually the building, the auditorium there where my cousin received the message from my grandfather. I didn't know anything about spiritualism. I just went and started talking to people and knocking on doors and wandered around the entire summer, that first summer, making pictures and trying to figure out a way how to tell a story like this about spiritualism, which is about really invisible communication. And so, I just straightforward documentary pictures and spiritual healing. I went to spoon bending class, and I eventually started to photograph mediums. But it was just constantly confronted with, how do you photograph this exchange between a veiled presence and a visible body? And eventually I was allowed to bring my camera into seances, but I struggled with how to be true to the psychological reality of these events. And I was constantly asking, how do you photograph invisible things? How do you photograph the invisible? And what happened for me is I started to have a few happy accidents or synchronicities with my camera. This is one where I was trying to photograph this woman, and everybody was seeing a second face that looked just like hers, but it wasn't her, it was a little different. And, oh, maybe it's your grandmother, or maybe it's your spirit guide. And I didn't see this second face. I just saw a woman holding a red flashlight, and I tried to make a very straightforward image of it, and this is what I got on my film. So this accidental photograph was more true to the psychological reality than the straightforward picture I was trying to make. And I found this accident really thrilling and synchronistic and uncanny. And this is another one I had where I got this strange purple orb on this woman. I brought her the photo and she said, "Oh, that's Bob." And, and she was talking about her deceased husband. And I had never thought of photography in that way because I was trained as a photographer. I worked as a professional photographer for 25 years. And you're taught to cleanse these things out and control the medium. And so the thought that you could let the process kind of speak in a way that you were not controlling was really interesting. And then the spiritualists are the ones who taught me about spirit photography. And I had never heard the term before. It is not in the standard surveys of photographic history. I found them completely ridiculous and shocking and absurd and outrageous, but also tender and sweet how they spoke about grief and love and loss. But it was the pictures of spiritualist mediums in action that became of most interest to me. And so I became a student of this strange photographic history. And then I found out about something called ectoplasm, which is this the bodily excretion that's said to morph into form, and this completely blew my mind. Pictures like this. They were so highly strange and grotesque and oddly beautiful. And I want to mention these pictures too, because some of the most shocking images, and I actually wrote my research reflection about this, are images of a woman named Mina Crandon, who was known as the Marjorie the Medium. And she was a subject of 2 Harvard investigations. She was actually, one of them happened at Emerson Hall. And I find her pictures some of the most shocking I've ever seen. And I wanted to decode these pictures, and I wanted to know the meaning behind them. I wanted to understand what ectoplasm even was. And so I think for many of us, myself included, the first time I heard ectoplasm was through the movie Ghostbusters. And Ghostbusters is, co-written and created by Dan Aykroyd, who's a 4th-generation spiritualist. The film was largely influenced by his grandfather's Séance, great-grandfather's Séance records. And this is actually a picture of his great-grandfather at Lilydale. And Dan wrote the foreword to my book, and he let me use the family photo in the book. So ectoplasm has made other appearances in visual culture. This is the artist Mike Kelly, and Tony Orsler has also used it in his art. But there's also examples like this, the spooky ghost scene from South Park. And I'm using this to make the point that there's this cultural awareness of ectoplasm that is completely separated from this history. Like, we know what it is, and it's a symbol that works in culture, but it's totally removed. And so within these recent examples, the visionary artist Paul Lafolie, also from Boston, statement for that comes closest to explaining its authentic meaning. The word ectoplasm is taken from the Greek ektos plus plasma, meaning outside formed. It's this paradoxical substance that's both spiritual and material. It's death and life in one, in this one form. And it symbolizes the merging of those 2 realms. It was named by Charles Richet, a Nobel Prize winner in medicine. And in Richet's description, it's an extension of the medium's body that creates a form for itself and seems to come to life. There were in the Victorian era and into the 20th century, serious attempts were made to study ectoplasm. And like I said, some were done here at Harvard. Some compared it to the natural phenomena like plasma, spiderwebs, slime molds, the chrysalis of caterpillars, or the pseudopods of protozoa. But there's this problem of cross-cultural evidence. Why doesn't ectoplasm appear in other cultures or throughout the ages? It seems to only move across the world after the photos have been shared. And some have argued that psychokinetic abilities can be accessed through a technique of visual focus. For example, how saints have used painting and sculptures for levitation and stigmata. Others point to shamanic concepts such as spiritualized phlegm. But of course, scandal has always surrounded ectoplasm, and Houdini famously hated it. Here is a fake ectoplasmic photo he commissioned of himself. and there's been exposés like this one, The Psychic Mafia, which is about a spiritualist camp in America named Camp Chesterfield, and it's a very juicy read. I highly recommend it. It's a good book. But so mostly, spiritualists started banning all these seances. They got out of the dark room. A lot of what you see now in spiritualism is kind of like the popular TV shows, like the Long Island Medium, where it's just a room, people just talking, and that's how talking to the dead is dealt with. But all the mediums that I met told me that they believed in ectoplasm and that people still could do ectoplasm, and it was happening, but I just, it was just hidden. And so I just became completely focused on trying to find it. And this led me to a place called Arthur Findlay College, which is a learning center for spiritualists outside of London. The best way to describe it is like Hogwarts for adult spiritualists. And I mean that in the best way. If Lilydale's a town, Arthur Findlay College is a building, and you go there and you could take any class, trance, healing, but you can also take physical mediumship. And Arthur Findlay College has always kept this tradition of the ectoplasm seance around, even when it was unpopular. They had a famous principal who would do ectoplasm seances a couple times a year. And so I traveled there for the first time in 2003, and I finally saw my first medium's cabinet. I had only ever seen those in like Victorian images. And we were taught how to use the medium's cabinet. This was my seance classroom where you came and you sit in the dark. And so all week, every morning and afternoon, we sat in the dark and sang, calling in the spirits, asking them to appear. We were told ectoplasm is very dangerous to produce, and that only the very best mediums can produce it. And each of us had students, we each took a turn in this cabinet, and I did as well, and to see what would happen. But by the middle of the week, our teacher was like, yeah, you guys are really bad mediums, and I am a really good one, but this group is like clouding even my psychic faculties. And so like everybody was just like so bummed out and so sad. And then during our tea break the next day, this woman comes in, one of the other students, with all this tissue all over her face, collapsed in her chair. She said, "Look, I've got some." And so that joke and this wax mold in the museum was as close as we got to ectoplasm that week. And so this is like, I was working for about 5 years, and I felt really stuck. I was like, spiritualism is not something you could do a documentary project about. I was doubtful I'd ever find ectoplasm, or real like ectoplasm in the sense that you see in those vintage images. And I got really frustrated. I just felt it was an impossible project, and I stopped for like 4 years. I didn't do anything. I never thought I would do anything with this work. I thought it was just over. But I couldn't stop thinking about spiritualism, and I started reading, and that's when I started doing research about parapsychology and anthropology of ritual. And these are 3 books that really helped me rethink the idea of performance and religion and symbol, and the topic of fraud. And so rather than dismissing this legacy, I started to see the fraud and deception as a complex and even necessary element within the seance, and started to think about theories of placebo performance and such. And I became interested in the ambiguity rather than, is it real or is it not, or can I, what can I find some answers? I just kind of dove right into just all this strangeness. And so during this research, I also got inspired I found out spiritualists used cameras themselves, and they used video, and they used it in experimental ways. And I became really influenced and interested in a group called the Skull Experiment, there was a seance group in the 90s, and they caused this big controversy because they were creating all these videos. They would set up mirrors and film into mirrors, and they had a consultant from Polaroid who gave them like their own processor, and they were bringing scientists in, and they were claiming they were making all these really crazy photographic artifacts. And even though all of this spirit photography and all of such material is dismissed as an absurd curiosity or fraudulent entertainment, I started to see them as ritual artifacts, and you know, this modern media, this mediating function that it was taking. And so I wanted to learn all about what people were doing with technology, and so that's a big part of the book, is finding what mediums were doing, like how they were combining their bodies with their cameras and their recorders, and radio Ouija boards called ghost boxes, and all these different experimental processes using like light and gear and mediumship. And then I found out there was a new form of spirit photography called orb photography. You know, you would think there's no such thing as spirit photography anymore. No. In the digital age, there is orb photography. And the orb photographers are not concerned whether it's dust or water or like how you're going to explain it away with a technical explanation. The point of an orb is to interact with it, to have some kind of conscious interaction. One process is called orb calling, where you ask for the orbs to appear. You have the orbs, you know, you put out your arm and you ask for an orb on your arm or your fingertip, or, you know, you ask for messages. And there's my favorite orb photographer is a woman named Liz Webb, who's working in Australia, and I've been interviewing her a lot. And her orb photography really blows my mind. She has like a whole catalog, a whole theory of orbs and systems. And, you know, this is one example where a lot of orb photographers will zoom in to try and find patterns and meaningful images. And she says this is a silhouette of her grandfather. But it's this breakdown, this reuse of the photographic process. It's like putting the photographic process to the edge. And she's doing really amazing aesthetic things. And so, you know, I started working with some orb photographers myself, although I realized I don't have my other orb photo here. And then some of my research I do on Facebook with people like, and I find mediums using heat cameras, and there's whole systems where I put a few photos in here so you can see they use their eyeglasses to scry for spirits on the glasses. And so I started my own experiments, basically influenced by what was happening in with these DIY effects. And so here's one of water scrying. Here's an experiment I did at Loch Ness. Here's scrying, smoke scrying. Oh, this is my orb photograph. So I was with a bunch of orb photographers in Italy, and I said, well, I'm gonna go and I'll bring my camera, but I'm not gonna get orbs because I never get orbs. And they said, oh, no, if you say your prayers and you come out to the mountains with us, you will get orbs. And I got this picture, and still to this day, this picture just boggles my mind, because as far as you can zoom in on it, it's just orb upon orb upon orb upon orb. And it wasn't a dust storm, and there weren't bugs. And it's just a really mysterious picture to me. And so in terms of my own experiments, the medium I've worked with the longest and the most intensely is a woman named Sylvia Howarth, who features prominently in my book. And, you know, she's on the flyer for this talk. And she is incredibly creative and doing all sorts of, I guess what you would be termed outsider art or visionary art. She's making dolls. She's turning her room into a camera obscura. She's setting up cabinets in there. She's using Xbox Connect cameras to track the motion of her body and then saying, okay, now move without me moving. And so this is a picture of a screen, and she had it track her body and then shake hands with my friend who was sitting right there. And she had all these notebooks, like tons of notebooks online of herself kind of deconstructing. And I said, what are you doing with these pictures? I thought she was faking them in Photoshop. And she's like, no, she was just filming herself in trance. And then the moment when the video corrupted, she would screen grab it and say, that is what's happening to me. So I don't know if you've ever been on Skype and all of a sudden you see your own face kind of morph because of tech. She's saying, no, that's what's happening to me, and I'm going to show you in these notebooks. And so these pictures, she has hundreds of them, and they really blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like it. And so the way I started working with her was kind of inspired by her work, and this idea of her deconstructing, or, you know, this concept of blending with the spirit world or merging, or this concept of a mask. Spiritualists talk about the mask, when the spirit comes and blends with you and then you can see it. And so I love this picture because I think it looks like a light mask. And so back to the regular ectoplasm, I was still looking for it. I wasn't finding it. And I just, anybody who told me they were working with ectoplasm, I'd try and go and photograph. And what I discovered that a lot of people would say, oh, you're going to see ectoplasm, and then you would go to the seance, and it would be a very subjective effect. And so ectoplasm is a symbol for energy or healing, or, I mean, even if the temperature changes in the room, it might be explained by ectoplasm. And so I just started photographing, and so this invisible energy, or this thing that works on the body, I just started making pictures. And then I started playing around with long exposures. And in this picture, I don't know if you can see it well. Can you see? It's better in the book if you want to get the book after. But this woman I was photographing, Sharon Harvey, she said, don't take any long exposure pictures. I don't want people to think I'm cheating. I want a very straightforward picture of me in trance. And if the spirit world comes in, they'll show themselves just that way. And I said, okay. So I was taking the pictures, and then all of a sudden her spirit guide addressed me and said, I want you to take one long exposure and I will show you my mask. And I made this picture. And I started to think about all of my previous accidental photographs and how letting the process kind of be messy or write itself or be a participant it gave metaphors for the invisible experience, and how playing with time in photography was oddly appropriate because the distortions of time and space are characteristic of paranormal testimony. So my photograph did not verify what occurred, but it opened the picture up into these psychological, imaginative truths that resist verification. And then even lately, I've just been writing about this, about how, the first photographs of like the dwarf planet Pluto are long exposures, a long exposure of a physical body moving in space. And we consider that like really scientific. But we don't with something like this, or with the human body. When you photograph the human body and you want to know about it, you want to freeze motion, you want it to be clear. But it's the same mechanism, it's the same. So I just started playing around with all of this and these transformations. And so the book is as much about photography as a medium as it is about spiritualism and spiritualist mediums, and playing those off of each other. And there's a lot of, I found a lot of similarities, philosophical and literal and metaphorical, between the photographic process and mediumship, and started to play with that. So that's a big part of the book. Like, and for example, this picture, that's one man, but he appears as two in my long exposure. And when I showed it to him, he said, oh, that's my spirit guide. He's doing the healing. I'm just standing there. And so back to the actual ectoplasmic streams. I finally met a medium named Kai Mugi, and he's a German medium, and he's probably, I guess he would be considered the bad boy of physical mediumship of our current era. And I had been in touch with him for quite a while, but in 2013, I finally had the opportunity to photograph Kai, who is different from the physical mediums I met, because when he said ectoplasm, he meant exactly like those vintage streams from the vintage images. And it was truly surreal. It was like watching those pictures jump to life right in front of my eyes. And I've interviewed Kai a lot. There's a whole, one chapter is in the back, there's a story section, and there's a whole chapter with Kai just explaining his ectoplasmic seances. And he says ectoplasm can be seen as a device, a screen for projection, a place to put the unarticulated, and it can act as a physical place for the ineffable. This is a video I made of Kai, or it's an anime. I'm sewing together pictures because it's so low light you can't shoot video. But he also describes ectoplasm as flesh that is literally born, a living, breathing substance. And so I asked, why would you travel the world and be doing these ectoplasmic seances? What is the purpose? And he said the first is ectoplasm has healing powers. This healing is a byproduct that comes about through the attempt to merge material and spiritual realms. And the second is it's to get people out of their own heads. Kai says, and I quote, "We're not trying to make anyone believe anything. We are just happy if at least they have one thought outside of their normal thought pattern during our seance." So shortly after I made these pictures, the parapsychologist Stephen Browdy, no relation to Anne, he was doing like he was trying to do a legit parapsychological study with Kai, and it's a long story. It could be its own presentation, but somebody got into Kai's eBay account and saw that he bought spiderweb material, and there was like all this like he said, she said. There's a lot of peer-reviewed papers about this this thing that happened, and after this exploded, it was a big scandal. I said, "What is Kai going to do now? I mean, is he over? He's going to hang it up? He's going to stop these seances?" And no, Kai continued on, completely unbothered by his critics, and he did something shocking. He brought back the full-formed materialization. And this is something that had not been happening in spiritualism in over 100 years. You may remember this picture that I showed earlier. That's when it was popular. And so Kai was blogging these pictures, and I thought, I have got to go and try and photograph this. And so I called him and I said, "Can I come and photograph one of these seances?" He said, "Yes, but I only do them in Switzerland and Germany with certain people. Only certain people can be there, and you can come, but I can't guarantee that you're going to see anything, and it might be that nothing happens." And so I took the chance, and I flew to Switzerland, and I went to a seance, and I did make a picture. And this is the picture that I made. And this is the spirit of Colonel Henry Alcott, one of the founders of Theosophy, who appeared at that seance. And he actually gave me a coin that I took home. And so I sent Kai this picture. He said, "As soon as you get back to your Airbnb, send me the picture. I'm dying to see it." And then when he saw it, he said, "Oh, no, this is a horrible picture. I guess I was like just too nervous that you were coming." And so this is literally, he called it a mediumistic preterm birth of the spirit. And it was because there was too much pressure put on his translate. So he said, "You cannot publish this photograph." So I left thinking, I got a picture, but now I can't use it. But 3 weeks later, Alcott came back to the seance room, and they got the resident seance photographer, Marcus Kepler, got the good picture. So after that was published, I was allowed to use my photograph. And so I'm going to draw to a close really quick with some of the strangest experiences I've had, which with a medium named Gordon Garforth, who this is his seance setup. And he told me when I met him that his hand got big in seances, and he could manipulate his hand. And it was this ectoplasmic phenomena. And I thought, okay, well, I'll go to this seance, but I probably won't see that because, like I said, sometimes people tell you things you're going to see and you don't. So I'm sitting in the front row, and he goes into trance, and his wife says, "Okay, now they're going to work with Gordon's hand." And then he put out his hand, and the next thing, it was like a normal hand, and he just moved it. And to me, as a witness, it just looked like it skipped into this gigantic form, and then it was gone. And it didn't look like a magic trick. It looked like flesh that just got big and then didn't. And I thought I was crazy. I'd never seen anything like that before. And I actually like screamed out like, "Oh my God." And then everybody else started screaming, "Oh my God." And I thought, oh, did they see what I saw, or did I make everybody scream? And I was convinced I would see my picture and it would be like a small hand, but no, it was a very grotesque. It reminds me of those big hands you see at football games. Like, I mean, it was just the weirdest, like most bizarre experience I've ever had with my eyes in a seance. And I love that there's all these explanations that you can read into it. And I really honestly don't know what happened. I took this to Lily down the historian and said, "Shannon, that's a glove." And I said, "No, it wasn't a glove, I swear." But so then there's one more session with Gordon where I'm taking these really long, it was an impromptu trance session. I think there was only like a security light lighting this. And I took these pictures of him, and, they're long exposures, and he looks really blurry and very different in each picture. But there's one picture where, I didn't like this picture. I didn't like the the little mustache. I thought it was just kind of creepy, and I wasn't even going to show it to him. And he saw this picture on my screen, and he said, "Oh, that's the picture, and then that's the picture." And I just this picture, and then he months later he invited me back to his house, and he showed me this picture of his great grandfather, this carte de visite, and he felt like that what was happening with my picture. And so it's how I end the book. This is the strangest photographic synchronicity I've ever had, but it's also, I love that it's a picture of a picture, and that's how the book ends. And so I'll draw to a close now. I'll just go through, I mean, maybe we'll have time for questions and stuff, but so after the book, I've been doing a lot of writing about kind of trying to argue why, photography's paranormal archive is not just fringe curiosity, but it's really central to understanding the medium itself, because it shows us how photography can move between subjective and objective realities. And, I talked about painting being reframed now, but this has not really happened with photography just yet. It's just now photography didn't even become accepted as an art really until the late 1980s. And so I think now that it's firmly established as a fine art, and also with AI, I think it's kind of a prime time to be asking these questions, because with AI, all these metaphysical anxieties about truth and agency and reality are like coming back. And photography has always questioned the boundaries of reality. It has always done that. And back to Marjorie again. So this is actually that medium Marjorie, Mina Crandon, that I mentioned before. And I was thinking about like how a lot of these early photographs, they use the hand, and how the hand is really this religious icon. But in sacred art, the hand blesses, transmits power, it stands in for divine presence. And here it's this charged symbol, submitted to forensic procedure. And so here we have this is Marjorie, and I actually believe that this was part of the Harvard study, but it wasn't done at Harvard. This actual picture, it's in my book, it's from, because she would produce a hand of her dead brother. She was in grief over her dead brother, and that was what she was, her most famous feat in her seances. And it was actually fingerprinted. And I know the story is it's just completely bonkers, but what I want to say, it's like grief and ritual meeting this strict rules of scientific testing, like all in one moment, this really loaded moment. And drawn from my book, the artist Tony Orsler, he writes about the importance of this early photography. And also something really mind-blowing is that, this virtual reality that we are now experiencing is because of a photographic process. It's because of this light that you cannot see that etches on that tiny, tiny chips, and that's actually what's making our virtual reality. So you can just get really, it kind of breaks my brain thinking about it, but I kind of think that this early spirit photography was kind of, it's almost like a metaphor. They were looking into the photographic material to access other dimensions, and in some odd way we did do that. Very strange. And I wanted to also just say that Séance photographs have shaped modern visual culture in ways that are not yet fully acknowledged. And I think there's lots of possibilities, such as Francis Bacon's early breakthrough works were very much inspired by spirit photography. This is the first panel of his major breakthrough painting. A lot of his boxes that he puts the popes in, I think, and there's other art historians who are thinking this too, that it was drawn from the spirit cabinets of mediums. And so part of my work too is I do a symposium every year, and one year I did have Marjorie's great granddaughter come and talk about Marjorie as like a human being and not just as the crazy bonkers story that we know from parapsychology. And so a lot of my work is about saving archives. I was involved in helping the Eileen Garrett archive be relocated to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And my latest, which Charles brought, thankfully, this article, I saved an archive of Séance photography related to the poet John Neihardt, who is the author of the book Black Elk Speaks. And Neihardt, towards the end of his life, he had his wife died tragically, and he started having experiences in the home that he thought was from the spirit of his wife, and he started having seances with his students, and he was training them in hypnosis and doing all sorts of experiments, and it was all documented by one of the students. And I have the entire archive. It's a very long, crazy story, but I've been restoring it. So here's, I have some of the old pictures. I even found the negatives, and it's a massive archive with audio and tons of photo books, and that was just recently published in Art Forum, so you can read that whole saga. And there, I think I did okay time-wise.
No, you're there too. Okay, so did you stop sharing?
Okay. Yeah, I did stop sharing.
Okay, great.
Yeah, great.
So let's, thanks, Shannon.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu. Copyright 2026. The President and Fellows of Harvard College.